Dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Wolfgang Vasicek. I'm very happy to welcome you at a very unconventional evening where we will discuss with Professor Susanne Weigelin-Schwiedrzik from the University of Vienna very actual geopolitical questions. And the reason why I, as the founder and of Consideratio, I had the idea of organizing this is because I had the experience. I live in Russia at the moment, and but I'm very often also in Austria, in my homeland. And what we see is that we have very, let's put it mildly, very opposing narratives, very opposing perceptions of the opponent. Let's put it like that, and that is also is reflected in the media, as you know. And on the other hand, we have, I would say, at least this is my perception, it's my understanding. We have a world that is getting more and more, it's becoming more and more complex. So one question is, for example, what is the value, what is the sense of international law? It's understandable that for a small country like for Austria and for Europe, it is very important that we have a certain concept of international law, and that especially the powerful nations, China, United States, Russia, are in a certain way agreeing to the rules of international law. But on the other hand, what we can see is that already we have been seeing this for a long, long time. That and I have been reading about this also scientific literature, and we will hear more about by Professor Schwiedrzik, that we have a kind of erosion of international law. So we have asymmetric warfare, attempts with the help of internet, for example, with the hand of psychological warfare, with the help of proxy war, private armies to destabilize opponents, and very often you have also underlying economical and industrial interests that are not always have the attention they should have had in the international media. What I'm talking about is, for example, rare earths, the quest for rare earths, or, for example, the West is very concerned that the value, the standard value of the valuta of the dollar is losing its importance. And what we would like to do today, with the help of Professor Schwiedrzik, is to break through the narratives, break through the propaganda, and to understand more what are the driving forces and what is the perception of this fight against multipolarity that we have, especially from the West, you can say. What are the reasons, and what is how not the West, not the West, but how does for example, China, and how do representatives of the BRIC states perceive the West? That's very important, because, for example, we hear that NATO is a very peaceful, not aggressive organization, and as we know, it's a little bit you can't put it like that. It's more complicated like that. But I want to cut it short. That's the reason why this idea came to do this evening, and I'm very happy also that we have international online listeners, and we will have, after approximately 40 minutes lecture of Professor Schwiedrzik, we will have hopefully very interesting for you, all of you, discussion with international experts. So let me introduce to you Professor Susanne Weigelin-Schwiedrzik. She was professor of sinology at the University of Vienna from 2002 till 2020. She had studied at Ruhr University Bochum, and she is a professor emeritus of Chinese studies at the University of Vienna, as I said, and member of the Austrian Academy of Science. And it's also very important that she is also has really a name and is renowned not only as a expert in sinology, but also as an expert in geopolitics. And so what we will hear today is, as far as I know, not only about China, but also about the current crisis in the Middle East a little bit, and all these interrelations between all these conflicts. You can also say the conflict that is in the Ukraine, in Russia, and what that means for the world. And also the very important question is, if there is a multipolar world, will it lead to more stability or more peace? Or how can a multipolar world be set and be built so that it leads a little bit more to peace? Let me also mention that the last one I would like to say, I'm very thankful. There are two civic organizations. There is the Union Against Atomic Energy and Against War, and there is the Ehrfurcht vor dem Leben, very big organization. It's like Respect for Life in translation, a big organization, a civic organization, also for peace, that tries to bring together various people and to enhance the support, the understanding of a world in peace, which is very important today. Also, I'm very thankful that there is the Patrimonium Sancti Adalberti from Prague, and some experts agreed to participate from the Patrimonium. So let me again I'm very thankful for Professor Schwiedrzik that she accepted my invitation, and now I give the word to Professor Schwiedrzik. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and pleasure to be with you today and to share some of my insights on what was already introduced. Thank you very much for this very friendly introduction. Today I'm going to talk to you about my perspective on a world in turmoil. We just heard that there might be many reasons for this world being in turmoil, and I have a special perspective on this. And so far as I believe that the world is in turmoil because we have not agreed, or we have no longer a consensus on how we want to have this world organized. And at the same time, while we're experiencing this kind of turmoil, we actually are hoping that the world will find a new order. So why do I say this? Because I have a structural realist approach to analyzing the world situation, and structural realists, when they do their analysis, they look at very special things. I look at power distributions among major and minor actors in the world, and I analyze their motivations for their actions in the system of international relations, and I analyze the kind of conclusions they might draw from their analysis of their own interests and the options they have and which they might want to follow. So my perspective is a perspective that actually tries to understand the different constellations in which actors decide on the kind of options they take. And I think it is important to say that this is sort of a perspective that does not focus on the ideological constraints that different actors have in the system of international relations, because the basic assumption is that countries pursue a certain interest, and they have an ideology accompanying this. But the fact that they're pursuing their interest is more important than the kind of ideology they use in make their way of positioning themselves in the system of international relations plausible. So this implies that I will not give any policy advice, but I think that a structural realist approach can give an analytical basis for decisions to be made. And they can, of course, be decisions that go in all kinds of directions. So very important in this aspect is, in this context, is that we observe at this moment, as a sign of our world order in turmoil, multiple military conflicts that are actually sort of evolving in front of our eyes simultaneously. And of course, the most prominent conflicts we are observing at this time is the war in Ukraine and the war in Iran. My sort of basic assumption for what I'm going to tell you today is that these conflicts are part and parcel of a process of defining a new world order. So they are at the same time a symptom of the world being in turmoil and a sort of way how major actors and minor actors are trying to participate in defining a new world order. So if we look at the war in Ukraine, I think it is quite interesting to see that clearly this conflict was initiated by Russia, but that we have to see that there are a number of sort of hidden actors that participate in this war. Not only, of course, those actors that are in front of our eyes, pursuing a military conflict, which is Russia and Ukraine, but that there are hidden actors such as the US, China, and also the EU, acting in an indirect manner and trying to influence the outcome of this conflict. If we look at the war in Iran, we see that the military conflict was obviously initiated by Israel. It is supported by the US, but Russia and China also play a very important part in this conflict, again, as hidden actors. They don't show openly that they are involved in this conflict, but so far they sort of prefer to influence it from the back, to influence it as hidden actors. This is also true for the EU, that so far has been mostly inactive with regard to the war in Iran. But if you look at France and Germany, you see that certain member states of the European Union actually do not shy away from getting involved. France is very much involved. You might know that President Macron actually quite recently sent the French aircraft carrier to the region, which shows a comparatively high level of involvement, especially of potential involvement, whereas Germany is more on the rhetoric side of this issue. So the East Asia, as a matter of fact, is also a conflict zone, although at this particular moment, we do not have any open wars in East Asia. But in its vicinity, you might remember maybe that last year there was a 90-minute war between Pakistan and India. And in this 90-minute war, interestingly, China was also involved, because China actually provided the weapons that Pakistan used to be victorious, one could say, in this war. So the third potential conflict zone in East Asia is, of course, the question that whether or not China is going to attack Taiwan. And this potential conflict zone might develop into an open conflict as soon as Taiwan declares independence. So quite recently, the new Prime Minister of Japan, Takaichi, showed the Japanese interest in this conflict by saying that if Taiwan were attacked, then this would be also a problem for the national security of Japan. And for that reason, she is actually now arguing in favor of Japan taking over a more active role in this region. The US is again a hidden actor. It pursues what the US calls strategic ambiguity. Strategic ambiguity in this context means that neither Taiwan nor China knows what will happen in case of a military conflict arising in this region, whether or not the US will actually get directly involved or whether the US will stay a hidden actor in this conflict. Interestingly, Russia is also a hidden actor in this conflict. Quite recently, after Sanai Takaichi told that if Taiwan were attacked, then Japan would actually support Taiwan. Only a few days later, Foreign Minister of Russia, Lavrov, said in an interview that if Taiwan actually interfered into a military conflict between mainland China and Taiwan, Russia would also get involved into this conflict on, of course, the side of the People's Republic of China. So Russia is also a hidden actor because China actually counts on Russia as a quite potent military force that might deter the US from interfering into a military conflict between mainland China and Taiwan, because in that case, then of course the US would have to confront two comparatively, I would say, powerful opponents. So the conflict in the South China Sea, which is of course also a conflict in East Asia, is currently concentrated on China and the Philippines. The Philippines are a country in Southeast Asia that is very, very strongly aligned with the US. It recently permitted to the US to establish 5 more military bases in this country. And so this is, of course, sort of the focus of this conflict. But we see again that the US is a hidden actor and Japan is also a hidden actor with regard to the South China Sea issue. And last but not least, we also have to look, if we look at East Asia, at the situation on the Korean Peninsula. There, the conflict seems to be a conflict between North and South Korea. And this conflict has a lot of hidden actors because China is a hidden actor, the US is a hidden actor, and Russia is also a hidden actor. So if we look at these conflicts, we see that in all these 3 constellations, the US, China, and Russia are either directly or indirectly involved in the conflict. And quite interestingly, China is the only country in this situation which has so far not pursued any military assault on any other country, whereas both the US and Russia have already taken to military means to pursue their respective interests. But if we look at the minor actors, we'll see that they also play a very, very important role in this context. In the case of Ukraine, it is quite clear that the minor actor Ukraine is using the support by the EU and the support by the US to sort of try to have a war that is a prolonged war in the hope of being able to defeat Russia in case that this war actually takes a long time. And the reason that this war has been taking such a long time is not only because Russia is moving forward at very, very slow pace on the territory of the Ukraine, but it's also because the Ukraine is still supported by the EU and by the US and sometimes also by some other actors. So in this situation, the question whether or not we can come to a peace in Ukraine is not only a question that can be decided between Moscow and Washington, as we have been observing for more than a year now, but it is also a question that is being decided in Kiev. And the minor actor is of major importance when it comes to this final decision. And of course, the hidden actor EU also is a major issue here. Interestingly, we all know that the only country that has so far supported Ukraine and is a country that has so far acted as a hidden actor in this conflict, of course, the US has decided that they want this war to come to an end. But obviously, they have not been able to bring the war to an end, although they think that it would be in the US's interest to bring this war to an end, because obviously the US has other projects to pursue. So in the case of Iran, it is very interesting that the smallest country involved, which is obviously Israel, is the country that started the war. And of course, it could only start this war because it was sure of the support of the US. And of course, it is trying to defeat Iran. And if we read our newspapers, I think we read mostly narratives about Israel and the US being very, very successful in their project of defeating Iran. We will see whether or not the US will be able to end this war according to a Washington plan. And this Washington plan is quite clear because Mr. Trump wants to visit China at the beginning of April. And it is quite clear that he will not be able to visit China at the beginning of April if he is at war with a country with whom China actually has very friendly relations. So he is hoping for this war to end by the beginning of April, but we will see whether or not the minor actor Israel will allow for the US to end the war by this time. Last but not least, if we look at Taiwan, we see that Taiwan as a minor actor has a very important role to play. I just mentioned that a military conflict between mainland China and Taiwan will definitely arise as soon as Taiwan declares independence. And the People's Republic of China is, of course, very much aware of this problematic. And this implies that actually Taiwan can start this war without starting the war, by only declaring independence. And in some situations, this might be in the US's interest, and the US is the main supporter of Taiwan, of course. But in other instances, it might be against the interest of the US. But the minor actor might have reasons to actually declare independence in a certain situation, and by this, get this war going. So we should not underestimate that minor actors in these constellations play a very important role. This is a recent map of all the military conflicts that we have at this moment in our world. The color of intensity shows you how many people die. And you see that we have actually quite a lot of places with very intensive fighting. Of course, one of them being Ukraine, as you can see. So Europe is mostly gray. We don't have any military conflict within the countries of the European Union. But the other day we heard that Mr. Zelensky is considering the possibility of sending soldiers to the neighboring country, Hungary. So then Europe will have yet another country, maybe in military conflict. But you see that the number of military conflicts is very high, and a world order in turmoil is characterized by a big number of military conflicts actually happening at the same time. Not always does the US or China or Russia or the EU act as hidden actors, because there are also local actors that see that the major countries are very much involved in a number of conflicts, and then they use this opportunity to pursue a conflict in a very sort of in a region, in actually a local conflict. It's better to speak of a local context in this context. So again, if we look at all these conflicts we just discussed, we see that in all the three conflict settings that I just introduced to you, the so-called nuclear powers all are directly or indirectly involved. And in this context, we speak as structural realists of a triangular situation, which is a situation that is called strategic triangle if the most powerful nuclear powers are actually involved. I always speak of big triangles and small triangles. So, for example, if you look at the situation between Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union, this would be a small triangle because only one country of the so-called strategic triangle is involved. If you look at the situation between Taiwan and mainland China, you see it's a conflict between China and Taiwan and the US. So in this situation, we have two, but not three powers directly involved. I think one could even say, even though the US is trying to act as a hidden actor, I think everybody knows that it's playing a decisive role here. So within this triangle that you can see here on this picture also, there are different options for the three major powers to either collaborate or go against each other. And it is very important to understand that military means that we are observing at this time are not the only option that these countries have, but we see that Russia actually started using military means to pursue its security interests, and we now see that the US is also using military means to pursue its interest in the Near East, whereas China, as I just said, is a country that is still shying away from using military means, especially outside the area of East Asia. And they try to employ economic means such as export control, sanctions, tariffs, hybrid warfare, infiltration. Oh my gosh, I don't think we need to see that. Infiltration and subversion as additional means to, as we just heard, make opponents feel uneasy, make the social situation in other countries difficult. And of course, we all know that the US is also using economic means quite obviously. They started under the Biden administration with export controls and sanctions, and with President Trump, we now have tariffs. Hybrid warfare is very often only discussed in the context of what Russia does in the EU. However, I think we also know now that, for example, Israel was using lots of methods of hybrid warfare to prepare the ground for its attack on Iran. This is also true for infiltration and subversion. So one of the really important takeaways for China from the war in Iran and from what happened in Venezuela is that they are very much afraid that maybe the US, you never know, with President Trump as the president of the US, they are very much afraid of the US trying actually to get enough people in the surroundings of Mr. Xi Jinping to work for the American side so that eventually they could actually decapitate the People's Republic of China. So this is one of the reasons why, for example, President Xi Jinping never spends the night, 2 nights in a row at the same place. And they actually seem to be very much aware of a possibility that people in the surroundings of Mr. Xi Jinping are actually already on the US side, of course, without anyone knowing. And this is one of the reasons, for example, why Xi Jinping actually exchanges the personnel in its immediate entourage on a very regular basis. So the interesting thing about the strategic triangle at this particular moment is that they actually pursue a double strategy of collaboration and competition. So quite interestingly, the three major powers have one identical interest. And this identical interest is that they all want to impose their vision of the future world on our world. However, I don't think I say anything that surprises you if I tell you that they have different ways of organizing our future world. And this is, of course, how they compete among each other. And it is quite interesting to see that in this triangular situation, the most favorable position in the triangle for everyone who participates in the triangle is the position of the major country that is strong enough to be stronger than the sum of the other two countries. And if the country in the position of the major actor is stronger than the sum of the power of the two other countries, then this major actor can actually impose his ideas on the two other countries. And these two other countries realize that they can only comply with the ideas of the major actor. And that is why not only the US is actually striving to be the major actor in the triangle, but China is also striving to be a major actor. And of course, Russia is also striving to be the major actor. But they realistically know that at this particular situation, neither China nor Russia actually is powerful enough to act as the main actor in the triangular situation. So this is the reason why China and Russia actually collaborate at this moment, although they know very well that if the opportunity arises for one of the two to take over the main actor position, that would be the best thing that could happen to them. And on the other hand, you see that Mr. Trump is actually very, very skillful in pretending that the US is still the major actor in this triangle. So why does he, for example, show us that he can actually go to Venezuela and just take out the president and his wife? Because by this he can show how powerful the US is, that the military is very well trained, and that everybody has to be afraid of the US. Including China, as I just told you. So China needs to comply with certain ideas from the US in order to prevent the US from decapitating the leadership of China. But on the other hand, we also see that Mr. Trump actually is trying to pursue certain projects like ending the war in Ukraine, and he cannot reach the aim that he defines that are in the interest of the US. So that's why he is very, very skillful in trying to show us how powerful the US is. And that is the reason why he is now starting one war after the other. Because using military means to intimidate other actors in the system of international relations is the best way to show how powerful you are. Of course, you have to be successful. And he showed us that he was successful with Venezuela. And in this sense, Venezuela was like a sort of a first try to show how the world reacts to this one project that he pursued in Venezuela. And then there are some people who say, the next project is Iran, and then the next project is, of course, Cuba, and the next project, who knows, maybe Hungary, who knows, right? So very interesting constellation. The beginning of the war in Ukraine sort of marked a situation for China that China actually didn't really want to have happen. And this is that because of the war in Ukraine, suddenly China was in a position there it actually had the assessment that it needed to support Russia, at least to a certain degree, especially in everything that goes against the US, but is not located in Ukraine. So China is not directly involved in the war in Ukraine. Nobody has ever given any proof of China giving weapons to Russia in order to fight against Ukraine. So China is not directly involved, but of course it is using other platforms to weaken the US. And in this sense, they also collaborate very closely with Russia in BRICS and in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and also, of course, in the context of the Iran War. So with other words, if we look at our triangular situation, we see that Russia and China, after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, decided on a constellation of 2 against 1. Okay, they tried to isolate the US, and you saw as a reaction of this that Joe Biden actually had to sort of have new allies in Australia, in New Zealand, in Japan, but also, of course, in Europe, because he had 2 very powerful opponents, and he was not sure whether the sum of their power was still smaller than the power that the US could exert. And for that reason, he was very, very active in amassing all kinds of allies supporting his idea, for example, about the war in Ukraine. So I think this shows us that this triangular situation actually makes different constellations possible. And I think the main constellation is, this one actor trying to dominate the other 2. If one actor dominates the other 2, then the best constellation is that he can drive a wedge between the other 2. So, for example, when Mr. Trump decided that he wanted to normalize relations with Russia, he actually came to this conclusion because he thought that the position in which the Biden administration had brought the US by sort of having 2 very powerful opponents against this one country in the triangular situation, he said, okay, we have to change this. And what did he do? He tried to give Russia a chance to normalize the situation with the US, which would be quite beneficial for Russia. And of course, if he gives anything that is of benefit to Russia, then he will ask Russia to give something that is beneficial for the US to the US. And that would be for Russia to distance itself from China. And that would have a consequence that China could no longer rely on Russia in order to deter the United States from interfering into a military conflict between mainland China and Taiwan. So currently, quite interestingly, our 3 main actors in our strategic triangle show quite a lot of similarities. And one of the similarity they show is that they actually all use the word multipolarity for their vision of the future of our world order. Of course, they have different interpretations. And if we look at Russia and its interpretation of multipolarity, we can see that Russia is actually the country among the 3 that use the word multipolarity as the first of the 3. They started using the word in 1995. And at that time, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Russia wanted to make sure that the world could eventually accept Russia as a major power, as a world power again. Although, of course, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation was very weak, not only economically, but also with its diplomacy, with its soft power, and to a certain degree also militarily. And so because of that reason, they coined the idea of multipolarity, because at that time, when you spoke about multipolarity, the meaning of this word was that you wanted to be acknowledged as one of those poles in a multipolar setting. And this would imply that Russia would not have to go against the US and against the existing order. It would not have to be a revisionist in the international system, which is sort of the wording we use as political scientists, but they actually wanted to be reintegrated. And so they said, if you integrate us, you can also integrate others, and then we have a multipolar order. Quite interestingly, this situation changed quite a lot, of course, with Russia, which had waited since 1995 and to be acknowledged as a world power. It decided in February of 2022 that it would have to use military means, not only to actually solve a security problem, as they said, but also to impose on the world the idea that Russia is a world power. And if you speak in, certain settings about Russia being a world power, then there will always be people from the EU saying, no, Russia is a world power. Not at all, because economically it's so weak, it cannot be a world power. But world powers are world powers because other world powers actually regard them as world powers. And if you know that, for example, recently, only a few days ago, Mr. Trump called Mr. Putin again. And then the other day he called Mr. Xi Jinping. So by Mr. Trump calling Mr. Putin, he actually elevates him to the level of being a world power. Of course, as Mr. Trump wants to tell us that he is the main actor in the triangular setting, he will always make sure that we know that Russia and China are only near peers. So in the new national security strategy that was issued in November of last year, the US actually speaks about China not as a rival, not as a foe, but as a near peer. Right? And calling Mr. Putin also means that he actually takes him as a near peer. The interesting thing about multipolarity, as Russia seems to view it, is that they actually have an academic definition of multipolarity, which says multipolarity is a situation when the world is dominated by more than two countries. Okay, and you will see that there's lots and lots of academic publications from Russia, which are only interested in a triangular setting. So I just recently wrote a paper on China and Russia and India in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's quite interesting that it was Russia that actually formed this organization to be sort of dominated by three major powers, in this case by China, Russia, and India. So Russia likes the triangular situation. China doesn't like the triangular situation. China is a country that actually prefers a bipolar situation. And up until the war in Ukraine, China would always try to convince the US that the best way for the world to stay in peace would be for China and the US to share responsibility for world peace. And this sort of this was a sort of hidden agenda among the Chinese elite for a long time. But in 2017, during the 19th Party Congress, Xi Jinping said this openly for the first time. Of course, the US is not willing to acknowledge China and on equal footing and to share the responsibility for the world with China, at least under the Biden administration. This was totally impossible. And I think to a certain degree, Mr. Trump is also not willing to share responsibility with China alone. So his idea of normalizing relations with Russia is actually yet another blow against China's hope to establish a bipolar world order. So before the war in Ukraine, China always said, we want to have a bipolar world order. But with the war in Ukraine, suddenly Russia comes up and says, you know what? I'm also a world power. I'm number 3 here. And for that reason, China then sees, okay, if we are 3, and if Mr. Trump actually wants to normalize relationships with Russia, so then suddenly China would be in an isolated situation. And what does China do? China does exactly what the Biden administration did. It looks for allies outside the strategic triangle, because otherwise it might have to fear that the combined power of the other two is bigger than China's power. So that is the reason why China has actually been very friendly towards the EU for the time since February 2025, when Mr. Trump gave his first call to Mr. Putin. And they are, of course, very, very active among the countries of the Global South, trying to find supporters there. Since the war in Iran began, China is quite interesting in the way it positions itself in this context, because it shows very clearly that it is different from both Russia and the US. Because, as I told you at the beginning of my presentation, China is the only country that has so far not used military means to impose its interests on any other country. It is only Russia and the US which are doing this. So now China, of course, tries to create an image of itself as being the peace angel on this world. So China's view for a multipolar world is quite interesting. It now has to adjust to the situation that it has to take the Russia into consideration. And so what does China say? China says we have to establish a new world order on the basis of the UN system. And the only thing we need to do is reorganize the UN Security Council and make it into a forum that can have all continents of the world represented. So China says we don't want to destroy the UN. Mr. Trump says we want to destroy the UN. China says we don't go to war. Both the US and Russia go to war, right? And China says, if you rely on me, I will reorder the world for you so that we don't need to go to war against each other. So very interestingly, the US has never used the word multipolarity before State Secretary Rubio gave a speech that I think nobody in Europe took any notice of. He gave a speech in Panama very shortly after he came into this position in February of 25, and he used the word multipolarity. So what does the US actually understand when it uses the word multipolarity? If you look at the US national security strategy, you will see that they have a very interesting understanding of multipolarity. On the one hand side, they actually acknowledge the existence of the strategic triangle. But if you look at this strategy, you will see that it's very clear that the US actually wants to take over the main actor position by balancing between China and Russia. And this is actually what Mr. Trump does, and what many people in Europe obviously do not understand. If Mr. Trump has a problem with Russia, he gives a call to Mr. Xi Jinping. And if he has a problem with China, he gives a call to Mr. Putin. And of course, they always know of these calls having taken place, because there are readouts of these calls. And by this, he can always show that he has an alternative option. So if Russia doesn't accept his offer to normalize relations, then he can very easily sort of isolate Russia in the triangle structure and actually sort of collaborate with China, and vice versa, of course. This national security strategy is also very interesting, because it says that in order to avoid overstretch for the United States, that is already in a very difficult situation with more than 800 military bases all over the world, they now say that the regions have to solve their regional problems by themselves. So how does this actually work out for the US? I must admit that I had a little bit of a problem to understand this, but the other day I talked to a member of the US Embassy here, and now I understand. So the idea is actually that the US more or less appoints regional proxies in different regions of the world. So, for example, they would, of course, prefer for Japan to be their proxy in East Asia. They, of course, support Israel in Israel's war against Iran because they want Israel to be their proxy in the Near East. And if you look at Europe, you see, oh, our politicians have already understood this strategy, and now France and Germany and the United Kingdom are competing to be Mr. Trump's proxy in Europe. So if you have your best friends in Europe and in East Asia and in the Near East and later on also in Latin America to do your job in the region, then you don't need to spend the money they are spending at this moment. And you can actually dominate the whole world by sharing the responsibility for the regions with your proxies. And so their idea of multipolarity is actually to establish their proxies in this different regions. And for example, in the Near East, we now see that they're not shying away from the possibility of going to war between their proxy and a contender, in this case, Iran, and to let your proxy win this war so that this proxy also has a legitimacy to claim dominance over the region. And we can only hope that this is not going to take place in Europe. So, getting things done, right? So we sometimes think that Mr. Trump has a new idea every morning he wakes up. He might have a new idea every morning he wakes up, but he also knows what he is heading for. So the role of the regions is very, very interesting in this context, and I already said quite a lot of things in this context. So if we look at the Near East in the situation right now, it is very clear that the U.S. supports Israel against Iran because Israel is the most preferred proxy in the region. Why is this maybe not going to be successful? Because in this particular region, in the Near East, you not only have Iran and Israel competing to be the most dominant power in the region, but you also have, for example, Turkey. You also have Saudi Arabia. So it's not so easy to handle this situation. And I think that Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu decided that they are going for a big war against Iran, because if they can defeat Iran, they will also make Mr. Erdogan and they will also make Saudi Arabia shy away from any attempt to contend the hegemonical position of Israel in the region. In East Asia, Mr. Trump can count on a historical competition between China and Japan to take over hegemony over East Asia. And I think it is quite clear that the US, while it needs to collaborate to a certain degree with China in the strategic triangle, he is using Japan to actually make it impossible for China to be the hegemonic power in East Asia. So if the US plan actually becomes true, our future multipolarity is a multipolarity in which the US actually dominates the world by its proxies in the regions. And this is, of course, especially true for those regions of vital importance. you see that the European leaders, they're always best friends with each other, and they kiss their cheeks and they hug each other, But here at this table, we have three contenders, the UK, France, and Germany, and Mr. Zelensky and also Mr. Tusk from Poland are sort of assisting in this very interesting competition. We might know in a year or so who will win. So to come to an end, I would like to focus a little bit on the Sino-Russia relationships because I think this is of vital importance, how they actually at this moment collaborate in trying to build a future world order, whereas they know very well that there are also differences among them. They collaborate because they can actually complement each other. Russia is economically comparatively weak, but it's militarily comparatively strong. It's especially strong because it has already shown its strength, whereas China has lots of weapons, but nobody knows whether they work, yes or not. So Russia is militarily strong. China is economically strong. So they actually complement each other. But then the differences already started. So Russia is very interested in consolidating the strategic triangle. They think that this is the best constellation, not only for them, but also for the world at large and for their relationship both with China and the US. But China clearly goes beyond the strategic triangle, and it is very interested in not only having a strategic triangle, but also having support by the Global South and by Europe. So far, they have, I would say, found a compromise. And I think that this compromise is very interesting because, according to my assessment, and this is very much due to my research on institutions in which both China and Russia collaborate, they want a multi-layered hierarchical situation. So they believe that the world could be sort of divided into different levels of hierarchy. And the highest level of hierarchy would be the strategic triangle. And then for the second and the third layer, you can actually invite more countries to be part of decision making. Of course, these countries will never be able to come to a final decision. This is only possible for the strategic triangle. But very interestingly, China has a history of thinking in terms of checks and balances. And so these other countries that form the second layer and the third layer could sort of function as checks and balances on the strategic triangle. And I think that this is sort of something that Russia and China can sort of agree on for the time being. To come to a conclusion, I would like to take up something that you mentioned in your introduction, which is the question of war and peace. So if we look at the 20th century, we see that the world order was changed twice by way of world war. The First World War and the Second World War are both world wars that came into being because the world order was in turmoil, and the result was a new world order. However, to be a little bit more optimistic about the time in which we live, we can also see that during the 20th century, we have two examples for the world order having changed without war. And I would argue that the year 1971 is a very crucial year here. The US was in crisis and decided to normalize relationships with the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China replaced the Republic of China in the United Nations and took over China's position in the UN Security Council. From this moment on, the Cold War that used to be a bipolar setting suddenly became a triangular setting. I started studying at the University of Bonn at the time, and for us in political science, it was totally natural to speak about triangular relationships in the world order. The second very important example for a peaceful change of world order is, of course, the end of the Cold War. Because the end of the Cold War, of course, also took quite a number of victims, but there was no open war, neither between the major powers nor between a major and a minor power. And there was, of course, no world war at the time. So it was this second change, peaceful change, that actually ended the Cold War and generated the so-called unipolar moment, a situation that we had never been through in the 20th century and not before. A situation where one country was so powerful that it could actually make the whole world comply with its interests. So this is how I come to my conclusion. I hope I have not been running too much over time, and please give comments and ask questions, but I think we first have some specialists talking online to us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I recently have read Christopher Clark, The Sleepwalkers.
Yeah.
And it is for many, many decades. It was like Germany, in the First World War, Germany started, or Austria-Hungary, with the help of Germany, started the World War I.
Yeah.
Then Christopher Clark produced a scandal in a certain way, because he pointed out that there are, everybody has, as you pointed out, everybody had its interests.
Yeah.
And so they already had their unions and their alliances, and they had also their proxies. And all that.
Yeah.
And now I don't understand. Maybe I'm not intelligent enough, but I don't understand. What does it mean? What does it mean, provoked war, not provoked? Because on the one hand, we are talking about, okay, we have to, in diplomacy, for example, we have to understand, and that's also one of the aim of this evening, we have to understand how our opponent is thinking.
Yeah.
If they have security interests, what you pointed out, maybe we don't understand it, but we have to try to understand it. And but now in Europe, they are saying, okay, for example, there's this unprovoked aggressive war.
Yeah.
And now, let's say, for example, if you take, for example, 2003, the attack on Iraq, it was provoked by mass weapons. However, they didn't find it. Or you see now Israel also, what is provoked, what is not provoked? And the second question I would like to ask is, there is a theory that there was, it's a certain utopia, it was already till the Second World War, that there was a certain vision that maybe the German Empire and Russia and Europe with this and Russia, they might work together. They might be together in a certain way. And then if you read, for example, Brzezinski, the big chess game, it's one of the really aims to prevent that. So what's your point? So provoked war, not provoked, and that.
Yeah, I think in order for you to be able to see me, I come back to my point here. First of all, I mean, this so-called provoked war is actually, as far as I know, a new wording that is not rooted in international law. In international law, we speak, for example, of preemptive wars, but we do not speak of provoked wars, right? So this is a political term. It's not a judicial term. Secondly, of course, many wars start without anyone knowing who started the war. Right. If you, for example, if you look at July 7th, 1937, which is the date when the war between China and Japan broke out, up until today, China will say that Japan started the war and Japan will say that China started the war. And actually, it's extremely difficult to find any source material that definitely can tell you who started this war. Right. This is sort of a very typical situation, especially in the past. So if I give you a very easy example of a provoked war, I would say that China actually discusses the issue that it might be forced into a provoked war. So according to what I already told you about the situation in Taiwan, the moment that the president of Taiwan would declare Taiwan's independence, China would immediately go to war, because China has a law that says if a province tries to declare independence, then the central state has to do everything, even to use military force, to prevent this province from leaving the country. Okay? So this implies that the minor actor Taiwan can have reasons to provoke this war. They know exactly that if they declare independence, then the other side sees itself in a situation where it must go to war against Taiwan. But then we also have a situation, for example, where because of one reason or the other, the US decides that it wants Taiwan to be in a war situation with mainland China. So in this situation, Mr. Trump calls Mr. Lai Ching-te and says, you know what? Why don't you declare independence? You know, it's quite interesting to see that the US is creating all kinds of opportunities for China to divert from its policy of not going to war against any other country. So, for example, maybe you have heard that there are some people, especially in social media, but also in mainstream media, who sort of wonder why China is so low profile in the context of the Iran war. And they say, you know, China and Iran are countries that are extremely friendly with each other. How can China actually not interfere on behalf of Iran in this terrible war? You know? And of course, there are some people saying, and I think this is also a discussion in China, which says, you know, if the war in Iran escalates to a regional war in which all the Gulf countries are somewhat implied, then China might come to the conclusion that it is absolutely crucial for Chinese interest to preserve the sovereignty and to a certain degree also the territorial integrity of Iran, and that then China will have to act against its own principles by sending military support to Iran. You know, and is this a provoked war? Yeah. So this is not this is an opaque example. The Taiwan example is, I think, a very clear example. And I think that if we sort of compare the situation between Russia and Ukraine, or the situation between mainland China and Taiwan, for example, with the war in Iraq, I think it is quite different. Because the war in Iraq was not a provoked war. Nobody ever used the word provoked war. And you might remember that the US actually tried to get support from the UN Security Council before it started the war in Iraq. Whereas neither Russia nor the United States tried to get a mandate by the UN Security Council in opening their wars. So this already shows that sort of the rules and regulations on the UN side are no longer respected, especially by the major countries, but then also by very small countries who suddenly think that it's now a situation where they can go to war against someone. Like, for example, we have this problem between Thailand and Myanmar. Which and of course they never asked the UN Security Council for permission to attack their neighbor, right? And so I think it is very important to know that a provoked war is not a judicial category; it's a political category, and I think we should be very careful in using this, because what is provocation and what is not provocation, as you just said, is very difficult to actually find.
If I may, let's about Russia. The second question, maybe we can talk maybe later on, because there's Dr. Sharma from India.
Yeah, and he should start talking now.
It's 2:30 in the night, so
oh my gosh.
Maybe he could make his statement now, if possible, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you, Professor, for your words. You know, I was struggling, but you know, your presentation was so nice that it just I had a small, nap, but, when you mentioned Russia, China, I was all, taken just by surprise because I've been working on Russia's relationship with China. So, you know, uh, just some of the observations, because we recently had this Raisina dialogue in India, and all these conversations that you mentioned were in one form or the other, they were discussed. So one, of course, was this observation that you gave, that Mr. Trump is going for a regime change in Venezuela. So he was able to do it in Venezuela for sure. But I believe he wouldn't be able to do that in Iran, because Iran is not Venezuela. So this is one conversation that we have in India. And in India, this debate is divided between two sides. One, of course, says that Iran is going to fall, but we have a lot of independent experts, and me included. We do believe that Iran will is likely to escalate it to a big level, and of course they might just work it out this time. So falling of Iran like a Venezuela doesn't seem plausible to many people in New Delhi. So that's on the ongoing crisis. About Ukraine, honestly speaking, India wants Ukraine. Of course, Indians want both the wars to end. There is a direct impact of Iran war on India. We do have these news coming up now that there is going to be a shortage of LPG supplies in India. India, of course, it's a very populous country, and we have a lot of supplies. Most 85% of India's LPG supplies, they are coming from Iran. Sorry, not Iran, but West Asia, different countries. So that has a direct impact. 2 Indians were killed today morning. So of course we have a big diaspora. 9 million Indians stay in West Asia, so that's also going to create problems for us. Uh, Ukraine war, of course, you did mention President Trump's attempts to cultivate a relationship with Russia right in his initial days. I was trying to relate to this triangle that you mentioned, US, Russia, and China. India's position, right, I think in last 2 decades has been to keep US and Russia in good books with us, so that we are able to deal with the Chinese problem that we have. But I think that policy is now beginning to fail because of the decisions that have been taken by President Trump. And there is again a feeling in India that he is more behaving more like, not as a very assured power, superpower, but he behaves more like, I would say, more like a insecure power, with who is shaking the system, right? And America is one of the creators of the same system, right? So that's why I say it's a very insecure power. I'm not exactly sure if there is a clear thought out strategy behind what the Americans are doing at the moment, because there is another narrative in India which says that the war was, of course, everybody knows the war was provoked by Israel, but the Americans jumped in, and of course there is no off ramp now for the Americans at the moment, right? So as I know, for the Americans, Venezuela and Iran are two different cases. They'll soon figure it out. So I mean what they currently are doing is quite not well thought by them. I can give a personal example. Just 2 months back, 3 months back, they had put 50% tariffs on India, saying that you are buying oil from Russia. And now, of course, they are telling the Indians to buy oil again from Russia because the Iran supplies are moving out. There is a problem in West Asia. That is why I believe it's not a well thought out strategy. So I don't know which way it is going to be. The word multipolar you mentioned, of course, Indians also use the word multipolar. But the problem is, for multipolarity to exist, there has to be some kind of a resistance to multipolarity, right? And because Mr. Trump is dealing with all the countries bilaterally, which has taken out the air out of the all those multilateral organizations that you mentioned, BRICS, SCO, or some others, right? So technically, I know, it's more like it more looks like a world which is multipolar, unstable, but also a world in which, of course, as you rightly mentioned, there is also a struggle between the Chinese and the Americans for a G2. India, of course, wouldn't ever support a G2 kind of a condominium between the Americans and the Chinese, because that means Asia belongs to the Chinese, and an Asia belonging to the Chinese doesn't fit into India's strategic calculus. So these were some of the observations. Thank you, Wolfgang, and thanks, Professor, for your profound presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. I just would like to point out that Dr. Raj Kumar Sharma is a senior research fellow at NATS and holds a doctorate from Russian Central Asian Studies So, and he's currently located in New Delhi. So I'm very thankful for Dr. Sharma. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the same is true for me. Thank you very much for your very interesting comments.
Yeah. Dr. Makhubela has an illustrious and his PhD distinguished career in the public service, having recently concluded his tenure as the Director General of the Department of Tourism, and prior to that holding, amongst others, the position of Chief of State Protocol and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Dr. Makhubela has also been at the helm of position in South Africa, in Portugal and Kenya during his tours of duty as Ambassador and High Commissioner respectively. So there's a long biography, and he's an absolutely many interviews with him. I hope it's technically possible to include him. Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much, Wolfgang. Professor, thanks very much for your very detailed contribution in this respect. I would like to raise two critical issues. One is this notion of multipolarity, and really what all of us are struggling with in the academia, in the civil society, and in business. It's around defining sources of power in this multipolar world. And as long as you have this uncertainty and tension that exists in defining the sources of power, you are likely to see the situation that is unfolding that has a propensity to result to some level of conflict and so on. Power in the bipolar world and in the unipolar world has been defined in terms of two issues: the economy, the economy and military power. But I like to bring an example that I hope you guys in Europe can relate to, and it really accentuates the new source of power that would exist in this respect. The power doesn't have to be only used in a cohesive manner, but even in terms of the soft part of it can be used. You know, in October, there was a bit of a crisis that was likely to engulf particularly Europe when Nexperia went into serious problem. The Dutch government at that stage, they decided to nationalize Nexperia, which of course was bought by a Chinese company. Now, Nexperia produces very critical chips that are required in the motor industry. Volkswagen Group was about to collapse if China did not lift the sanction. Volvo motor industry, a lot of other industries in Japan. But Nexperia also produces chips for the F-16 fighters. Nexperia produces medical equipment and so on. But when China decided to shut down the plant in China, in Dongguan, that was the source of the logistics that supported Nexperia in the Netherlands, that's when a crisis started to emerge. Because the Netherlands invoked the 1954 law that really gave the opportunity to nationalize a company in the best interest. But it came from the Biden administration when they first realized China was producing chips for their military industrial complex. And they had a huge problem about it. They started imposing sanctions. And that's why Nexperia ended in this sanction. And I'm raising this issue because it brings up the question of how China use a different source of power. When China imposes sanction, when the whole industry, the motor industry, basically in Western Europe was about to collapse, that's when Trump had a meeting in South Korea with Xi Jinping and really pleaded with him to lift this sanction on this critical resource that was required by Nexperia in the Netherlands. Once that happens, it started, the companies actually, it avoided a much bigger catastrophe that could have laid off a lot of people. Big industries could have collapsed around the world. But that's a source of power. China used that as a power to bargain. and to get what they want. So the source of power cannot only be in terms of the military and the economy. The resources are becoming a major source of power. Russia, for instance, has a lot of energy power, and it's going to use that to bargain. You'll be surprised that Russia keeps on providing the United States with about 16% of enriched uranium for its power generation, electrical power generation. Even at the height of the sanction, they couldn't avoid that. It's only towards the end of the Biden administration that they actually decided that they would impose sanctions but give the Department of Energy some leeway not to implement. That was precisely to manage the source of power that Russia has so much and mastered in terms of providing this enriched uranium. There are other sources of power that are starting to emerge in other parts of the world that can be used against big powers in terms of military and economy. So I'm saying there are pockets of sources of power that are starting to emerge around the world that will speak to this multipolarity. And multipolarity, in my own view, doesn't have to be cohesive. It can be very soft. It can be used to bargain and to exchange interests with other countries. That's a source of power. I mean, take Namibia, our neighbor here in South Africa. They produce 11% of uranium. It's a big source of power. I think the biggest producers of uranium is Kazakhstan. That's why you never see an army in Kazakhstan. The Russians will keep on providing security because it's a source of power that they realize exists there. Now, there are other pockets of power that are starting to emerge around the world, particularly with the emergence of this rare earths that China has so much monopoly and control over it. It's a source of power that it has. And it's going to use that to bargain not only with the United States and Russia, but with the rest of the world. But I'm saying this source of power, Wolfgang, can be used in a soft manner, and we're starting to see this. But we're struggling in the academia to find out what are the sources of power in this multipolar world. Once we've defined that, I think it will be very useful. South Africa, for instance, has about 73% of the global platinum. It's a huge source of power that it can use to bargain, because the power does not mean necessarily to get in a cohesive manner what you want. You can get in a very soft approach things that you desire, and you can exchange your source of power with others who are in need of what you are having. So this is this multipolar world that is starting to emerge. Or else if we look into the multipolar world in terms of economy and military, it's going to perpetuate the same suspects are going to dominate the world. The multipolar world does not have to have a dominant force, but it has to have pockets of very critical issues that the world can interface around. Let me conclude here by raising something that I was involved with the Quincy Institute research on the Better Order project. One of the recommendations that are coming from Quincy Institute, it's actually to devolve power of the Security Council to the General Assembly. The decisions of the Security Council must be endorsed by 2/3 majority in the General Assembly. And that's where you're going to see a power of one. Because if you can't master the 2/3 majority, any of the P5 can't master a 2/3 majority, one country, however insignificant people may think it is, that vote would count similar as the other powers. Let me also raise one issue that speaks to the military, and that is the conflict that exists between the United States and China. Part of this problem that you're starting to see struggling with defining how this multipolar world would coexist with each other, it's mainly because around the world, there's a big shift to the right and to the far right. And I always argue that actually the left has left us. If you look at the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, they've gone a bit to the right. The Democratic Party in the United States has gone a bit to the right. In Germany, the Social Democrats have gone a bit to the right. So the left has left us. We are remaining with the right and the far right. and the center right is bargaining with the far right. That's where the huge problems are coming from. But sometimes last year, September, President Trump raised the question of the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. And he said that air base belongs to the US. It was built by the US. But if you look at facts, the base was built during the Cold War in 1950 by the Soviet Union. But because that base is too strategic for the US for eavesdropping in terms of nuclear facilities in China. And that's why the US wants Bagram Air Base, which is a very strategic air base. The altitude of air base is so critical. But that's where you see this competition, where countries cooperate and compete with each other. But sometimes the competition around the old sources of power are the ones that are accentuating this rivalry and this propensity to resort to conflict and to want to exercise the conflict part. But what we are seeing now happening in Iran, it has changed the narrative around the strength of the conflict, because technology now plays a critical role in the warfare. That from sitting in Tehran, they can launch missiles into Tel Aviv, which is about 150 kilometers, 1,500 kilometers apart. But they're able to hit the target with level of accuracy. So that's where the level of technology then starts to change this. And I think with technology that is starting to permeate into military, you're going to see huge changes. The only fear that I cross my fingers as I conclude is that we should not allow artificial intelligence to take over command and control. We've seen Israel using artificial intelligence to identify targets in Gaza, and they were using what they call the gospel with disastrous consequences. And I think this discussion around multipolarity and sources of power must take into account certain things that humans should do, not to delegate command and control to artificial intelligence. Thank you, but I really appreciated your detailed analysis. If we had time, Professor, I would have loved to comment around the Russia conflict. I like to comment around other issues that we've reflected on the East Asia and the possibility of conflict there. But given the time restraint, Wolfgang, I think we'd have another time to have a focused discussion maybe on one particular issue. But let me really thank you for your contribution. I really learned a lot this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So there is Dr. Campbell and Dr. Drulák. Yeah.
We have him.
I forgot to mention, I wanted to introduce Professor Drulák. He's professor at University of West Bohemia, and he is a Czech scholar, diplomat, and activist, professor at the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of West Bohemia in Pilsen, and the founding chairman of the Czech Association Svatopluk. He was the ambassador of the Czech Republic to France and deputy minister of foreign affairs. He publishes on international relations and on Czech politics.
Thank you. So first, let me thank to Professor Schwiedrzik for her insightful lecture, and it really brought a lot of insights. I like, this idea that actually when we look at the three great powers, major powers, Russia, China, and America, that we speak actually with respect to Russia about three great powers, with respect to China that they would prefer just two powers, and with respect to the United States they would prefer just one power, their own American hegemony. It's sort of a nice sort of summary of this. I appreciate actually your structural realist framework, because I think it's quite useful, especially in the Western Europe, because when we listen to the Western Europe discourse, official discourse, it's so much, I would say, full of propaganda phrases about democracy, human rights, rules-based order, nothing of which actually matters, because these things are actually used very selectively with double standards. So it's quite useful actually to look at the power relations as the basis of the world order. And I have actually two observations which are linked with the structural realist framework. The first is about the peaceful change. It seems to me that structural realists tend to be a bit less optimistic about peaceful change than you were in your presentation, because you mentioned two examples of a peaceful change of an international order. First one in 1971, which was the entry of China into the sort of the club of major great powers, and then 1989, which is the end of bipolarity. But if we look at these two events from the structural realist perspective, then we would probably say that 1971 was not really a change of world order. Kenneth Waltz wrote his book, A Theory of International Politics, which is the Bible of structural realism in 1979. And he argued that the world is bipolar because the entry of China did not change anything with respect to bipolarity, because the military power, the distribution of the military power actually did not change at all. With respect to 1989, that was a peaceful change, no doubt about it. It was a major change, but this change was actually linked with the self-inflicted collapse of the Soviet Union. It was not the fact that there would be a power struggle and one of the major powers, one of the great powers, would lose peacefully and would accept the loss. It was basically the internal collapse of the Soviet Union. And as you may know, in Russia, there are people who argue that it was not totally self-inflicted, but it was to some extent the work of some American activities inside the Soviet Union apparatus. But let's leave this aside. Why I am skeptical? I would like the next change to be peaceful. No doubts about this, but I don't see actually much grounds for such an optimism, because what is ahead of us, the change in the international order which is ahead of us, is linked with with the diminishment or maybe the loss of the American hegemony. And if we look at how America is conceiving its role, then they may talk about multipolarity at some point. It was Rubio last year, that's true. But since then, actually, they significantly changed their rhetorics. So it's not Rubio 2025, but Rubio 2026. If you listen to them, we don't see much humbleness, which is linked with the idea of multipolarity. It's still the idea, America of the United States leading the world. And if you look at their aggressive behavior, they are not likely actually to concede this primary position they have to others. So in this perspective, I'm quite afraid that they will not accept the diminishment of their power without a struggle. The question is if it's the struggle in which they will be engaged themselves. That's one option. I would expect them to avoid it. But there is also the other option that they will try actually to provoke a conflict which would be useful to their interest. Conflict between their major competitors. Not so much within the triangle which you mentioned, meaning China and Russia, but where I see a real threat maybe is the provocation of a conflict between China and India, the Great Eurasian War, where Americans would play the role of an arbiter, of someone who actually tries to who is watching and who is helping the side which is weaker, which is momentarily weaker, just to keep the conflict alive. So that would be like my fear, and some reason why I'm afraid that this peaceful change, even though I would wish it to happen, may not be that realistic. And then I have another issue with the structural realist framework, and that's actually with their assumptions, because structural realists actually expect that the game of international politics is the game among the states. It's state-centric, and that the states behave in a rational way. If we look at what's going on in the Middle East between the United States and Iran, this actually does not fit a structural realist framework. And because the war which is now raging there, where we have United States and Israel on one side and Iran on the other side, is very much the war in which United States was dragged to some extent by Israel, which again, from a structural realist perspective, is difficult to imagine because Israel is a very small state in comparison even with Iran, not to speak with United States. But there is a powerful force of pro-Israeli lobby, a Zionist lobby in the United States, which is very much responsible for the fact that United States, that Trump actually entered this war, which is against American interest. So what do we see in the world politics are not just great powers, not their rational assessment of their profits and losses, but we also see all kinds of transnational lobbies, such as the lobby, the Israeli lobby in United States, which may provoke an important conflict. So in this respect, the world which we watch is not just about states, it's not just about rationality. And my actually point is that we need to ask to what extent does this rational power political analysis apply to China? Because the Chinese themselves, they use very different language. They try to avoid the language of power. That can be a strategic ploy, but what if they really mean it? What if their vision of the world, their perspective of politics is really fundamentally different from what we see as sort of rational, power-oriented politics, which is actually the vision of realism. Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe. Are there any questions here from the? Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. And you were focusing on the political actors, and called some hidden actors. I see some other hidden actors, especially in the hegemonic area of the United States. If you talked about the example of Venezuela, that was not a political action. It was prepared by the oil industry and by the military industrial powers to use weapons, and the politicians didn't actually know still don't know what they should do. The only thing was to get the oil. Maybe now in Iran it's as well one factor that the oil price is increasing. Well, some companies have some big efforts. My point is, I doubt that the politicians are really acting. They're just used to execute what the great international economic powers or banks want them to do. Maybe now in
Iran. If I may give an answer to this comment, I think it is very important. And of course, I think it is very important also to have different sort of angles from which we try to understand what is going on in this world. And I took the angle of geopolitics. But on the other hand, I would also be careful in trying to sort of reduce everything to the idea that there are economic forces, business forces that actually coerce politicians into taking actions. Because I think it is unrealistic to think that politicians that act as presidents or prime ministers or ministers of a certain country can take over this job if they knew that they would never be able to have their own agenda applied. So, with other words, politicians tell us that the job they are doing, they're actually doing on behalf of their voters, right? And so if a politician has to take a decision, for example, to go to war against Iran, I think he will not just, comply with the wishes of his business elite. And very often we actually have clashes between the business elite and the political elite. Very often, for example, in Europe, we have clashes between the business elite and the political elite when it comes to how to go along with China. The business elites in Europe would like to have a very, very friendly and fruitful relationship with China, whereas for a very long time, the member states of the EU, including the Commission EU, was pursuing a policy of decoupling from China, which was not in the interest of the economic elites. So that is why I think although I understand that, of course, the business elite has an enormous influence and can influence the decision-making of the political elites, I would actually shy away from thinking that their interests are identical. And politicians have to see that they survive in this game also by doing things that go against the will of the business elite and vice versa. So, I think that it would be a very important analytical procedure to really find out in detail and which points these business elites and the political elites actually have a common interest and in which points they do not have a common interest. You see from the example of how the EU actually deals with China that for a politician to take decisions on this issue is very complicated because the politician cannot easily just follow the wishes of the business elite. In this case, if the EU followed the business elite, they would actually provoke enormous conflicts with the US under the Biden administration. Yeah.
Dr. Hedder. Yeah, thanks for the very interesting presentations and also the external speakers. As an economist, I would tend to think that power relations are shaped by economic basis.
Mm-hmm.
And in that respect, I was a little bit surprised that you focused so much on this triangle of US, China, and Russia, and implicitly gave Russia a kind of equal position here, right? So you said, for example, that in this triangle, there's always this drive of one to dominate the two others. I would say, yes, there is a possible prospect for the United States. There is also a possible prospect for China, but it is definitely not a possible prospect for Russia. It's not realistic. Russia would never be able to dominate.
That's why Russia collaborates with China
at the same time.
Yeah.
So, and I think there are many other proofs that Russia is actually really playing a secondary role here, even militarily. You said that the military strength of Russia has been proven in the Ukraine conflict. I think there's also an opposite interpretation, which says that they have been very weak in their military performance. And the Ukraine, supported by Western powers, even only partly, it's only a very small part of US resources that go to Ukraine support, was already sufficient to basically prevent the Russians from having any kind of military success or a major breakthrough in Ukraine. So in that respect, I wondered a little bit whether you really see Russia on a par here and whether it would not be more appropriate to really take India more systematically into the picture, because India is much more strong in economic terms. It has the largest population worldwide, and it also has a significant military potential, which may play out sooner.
It was just defeated by Pakistan.
In East Asia. So that would be my first question. And the second one relates to the third speaker. That's actually what I really would like also your position have on this structural realist approach. Yes, nations pursue their interests, but isn't it really true that the Iran issue and the Israeli lobby in the United States are actually constituting an important exception here? I mean, you will probably know this well-known work by Mersheimer and others about the Israeli lobby, who argued exactly that way, right? Who said, well, the United States does have certain geostrategic interests, which can be well defined, and they are really distracted and actually going against the interest because of this very special, for all reasons, historical, cultural, and so on, influence of that lobby. So do you see that as an exception, or is it actually reconcilable with paradigm?
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting question. First of all, with regard to Russia, I don't think I am a military specialist. That's why I'm not going into a detail trying to understand whether or not Russia is actually winning or losing or whatever. But what I was trying to say is that and I said explicitly that Russia imposed its self-image of being a world power on the world. And if you, for example, compare the number of reports, the number of mentionings of Russia since the beginning of the war, the war in Ukraine, you will see that for a long time Russia was of no interest for the public in Western Europe, and now it's very much in the focus of this. And even there are politicians in Europe that think that Russia will go to war against Europe as soon as it will have come to a certain conclusion of the Ukraine war. So I think what I was trying to say is that I'm not going into the details of trying to actually make a quantitative assessment of what country is a world power and what country is not. But I'm saying that it is very important to understand that there are three major powers that actually, to a certain extent, without always making this clear to the general public, know that there are competitors. And these three countries are Russia and China and the US. If you take India, for example, India is pursuing a very, very intelligent policy because it's a policy of multi-alignment. And why do they pursue this very intelligent policy of multi-alignment? Because they know that they have not been accepted as a member of the club yet, but they definitely want to be a member of the club. And that is why multipolarity, for example, for India is a very important and very positive option. So from this point of view, I would say that I understand fully that there are reasons to believe that the power of Russia would never be, for the next 20, 30 years to come, to put never in quotation marks, the power of Russia will not be big enough to actually act as the main actor in this triangle. But there are so many things we don't know about the future. For example, we don't know about the future whether or not the political system in the US will actually be able to sustain, whether or not the financial system in the US will be able to sustain, whether or not the economy in the US is actually strong enough to support a military that makes it possible for the US to claim the main actor position in the in this strategic triangle. And if you look at China, I mean, I'm a China specialist. I'm not telling you that China is well prepared to take over a position as the main actor. So the biggest problem we have at this particular moment is actually that none of the three qualifies for taking over this main actor position. And Russia is very much interested in aligning both with China and with the US in order to make its weak position stronger. But if you align with China and the US in order to make your weak position stronger, this implies that you know very well that you cannot take over the position of the main actor in the triangle. So taking over the position of the main actor in the triangle is like an agenda that they follow. And maybe some countries will be able to fulfill this or to make this agenda come true at an earlier point than other countries. But basically, they all three of them think that they are potentially powerful enough to take over this position. And that's why I would say, and I keep, I repeat this, what I said earlier. A world power at this moment is a world power if other world powers acknowledge them as being a world power, right? And that's why, for example, China is extremely active in trying to convince the US that the US has to regard them as a world power. And I would even say that Russia went to war against Ukraine and took the military option instead of trying other options because it knew that by going to war against Ukraine, no matter what this war would look like, the fact that they are actually the power that has been in war for more than 4 years, and it's not a small war, is the instrument by which they actually sort of convinced the world that we have to look at Russia. And this is a major achievement, to put it that way, for them. With regard to Iran, I think that in every case, if you look at the Taiwan issue, if you look at the Iran issue, if you look at South Korea and North Korea, there are always, of course, also domestic considerations that you have to take into account. This is very, very clear. And I must say that I understand Mersheimer's argument saying that Donald Trump was heavily financed by people from the so-called Israel lobby, and that the Israel lobby is therefore expecting him to do what they want, and they actually wanted this war to happen. But on the other hand, I would say again, the president of the United States is not the instrument of the Israel lobby. I don't think that he would be in the position in which he is if he only fulfilled the wishes of the Israel lobby. For that reason, I would say that we have to understand why the US would actually take the decision to go to war against Iran. And my main argument is that they do this because they want to make sure that Israel can act as the proxy in the region where Israel lies, which is the Near East. They also have considerations, like, for example, that the situation in the war in Iran is not good for China. And if you listen to the Chinese foreign minister talking on this issue, he says, this war should never have started, and it's totally senseless, and we should stop it immediately, which is his way of saying, we don't want this war. Right. And this is very understandable. So from this point of view, I would say, I think that my structural realist perspective can explain certain options that the US took, but I'm not excluding that there are also domestic issues that actually compel Mr. Trump to take the decision he took.
There's this young man.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Okay, so I think what I've gathered from here, it's a very complex overall topic, which you have broken down very nicely for us, I think. And you've spoken right now about the proxy Israel. So my question would be the American strategy with proxies. How do you ensure loyalty? So we have seen Canada, for example, a very loyal partner to the US in the last years. Turn around and open talks with China, for example, after Trump's decisions. And so my idea is, if you go and you have the responsibility there, and you step away from taking that responsibility, how do you ensure that if the regime changes, if your policy changes, these peoples are not standing there being like, okay, we invested in the military, we are strong, we are economically strong, why shouldn't we go make other deals? Why shouldn't we strive for also a role in the hierarchy higher up?
Yeah. From my personal assessment, I would say that Mr. Trump has a problem in over-assessing the strength of the US. Therefore, he thinks that if he bullies other countries, these countries will be so much frightened of any negative consequences that they will not even try to go against any of his wonderful ideas. So why does he think that the US can actually sort of establish a system of proxies around the world? I think the historical examples that the US actually relates to are Germany and Japan. Germany and Japan have been very, very loyal to US interests and policies ever since the end of the Second World War. This is especially true for Japan, but it is also true for Germany. So if you look, for example, at the Green Party in Germany, when it decided it wanted to take over at least part of the power in the central government in Germany, they also decided that they had to switch to being pro-US. If you're not pro-US, you cannot be in a leading position in the Federal Republic of Germany. And if you look at the so-called AfD, they also now struggling between some people trying to draw closer to Russia and other people who say, you know what, we will never be able to take over any power in Germany if we don't show that we are loyal to the US. And if you look at Mr. Merz, what does he do? He tries to be loyal to the US no matter what happens in Washington. Yeah. So this is the example they actually have. And I think these two countries have shown that you can actually rely on the loyalty of your proxies for a very long time. However, this, of course, has a precondition. And the precondition is that you are strong enough and that you have enough to offer. You know, if you are not strong enough and if you do not have enough to offer, you will see that your proxies will decide that maybe they don't need you anymore. And it's very interesting. The other day, I heard a very interesting presentation from a Japanese colleague who sort of interpreted Mrs. Takaichi's policy by saying what she's actually pursuing is autonomy for Japan. And she is only using this situation that the US is interested in Japan taking over responsibility for the conflict between Taiwan and mainland China. She's using this opportunity in order to build up Japan militarily so that Japan can finally, after so many years after the Second World War, become a normal country. This is the wording they use in Japan. Japan is not a normal country. Why is it not a normal country? Because of its loyalty towards the US. You know? And now there's kind of using this situation, pretending, and the Japanese are very, very good in this, pretending that they are over loyal to the US, while at the same time pursuing a strategy of autonomy. This is how he interpreted this. I think maybe he was a little too optimistic about the prospects of Mrs. Takaichi. But I know because I'm quite knowledgeable with the history of foreign relations of Japan, and I know that they have always tried to find these kind of opportunities. So if proxy, or some people say vassal, has been a vassal for a long time, this does not mean that this country will be a vassal forever, right? Because being a vassal is not the best option they might have in mind. So they will always look for an opportunity to overcome the status.
We have slow.
Well, Carl, maybe just maybe it's this question, online.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Wilfried Leif from Unionists Against Atomic Power and War. Thank you, Professor Schwiedrzik, for the very interesting lecture. You gave a wonderful matrix how world maybe function at the moment. My English is not so good. I'm sorry. I want to say, I want to take the focus. What can we do? What can we make with all this? What you showed how it works today. So I mean, there are conflicts between countries, but behind, someone said it today, it's economics too. And what is the way why wars came up? It's, I think, a special kind of economic. It's the capitalism wants to extend. And if you come to an end of production, if people don't, especially in the north of the world, cannot buy all these things, you have an over consumption and so on. And the south is the global south is very poor countries, and the countries in the north part of the world want to dominate. If it's 1 or 2 or 2.5, and that's the reason they can't divide the world under each other. It's like in economy. If you have a big multinational concern. They want to eat up the others. For he has to extend make expansion. So I think we have to have a look. What's the reason of wars? Countries are help big economics to make their profits. And I'm from Austria, and we have an experience of two world war. We have neutrality. That means we don't want to go to war on no side, and never again. And we have to collaborate with the global south. I agree to Mr. Makhubela. He said we need a really new world order of countries and people who are in the same rights, not to dominate. And so my question is first to Professor Schwiedrzik. What do you think of Austrian neutrality as a model for other countries, or for how to make the world much more to be living in freedom, not freedom, in peace? And would you said that's why I have a problem maybe with you. One of your sentences, you said the main actor. So it's I have misunderstood. Would it be better if one took over the main actor position in the world? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I must say that this issue of multipolarity, which was raised in this question and which was also raised by the commentators, I think is a very tricky issue. If you ask me personally, actually here I didn't give my personal opinion. I tried to explain to you how I think that Russia, China, and the US actually sort of why they use the word multipolarity and what they mean by using this word. I personally think that multipolarity is not a situation in which the world can actually stay for a longer period of time. Because the world tends, from a realistic point of view, to actually give decision-making power to the most powerful people, because if you don't do this, then the different interests between the different countries will be so prominent that the world cannot achieve an orderly situation. And why does the world actually want an order? Because, as you see now, we are in a turmoil situation, and we wake up every morning and something new has happened. This is not only disturbing for us personally, but if you look at people who run businesses, or if you look at people who run institutions, if you look people who have to work with a certain budget of money, you will see that these uncertainties actually make governing the world really, really difficult. And that's why a world in turmoil tries to find a point where countries can come to a consensus on a future world order. And I believe that this consensus is not a democratic consensus, but it's a consensus which is actually built by power structures. And I totally agree with what you said and what some other people also said in the commentaries, that it's, of course, extremely difficult to assess power to a point that we can actually say, for example, this country is the most powerful country and this is maybe the second, because we can have all kinds of criteria. So if we talk about the economy, then some people say, China has already taken the US. Others say, no, it's way down. Then some people say Russia cannot be a world power because it only has the GDP of Italy. Then other people say, yeah, but if you calculate it a little bit differently, then it's the fourth major power in the world with regard to its economy. So it's very, very difficult to assess this quantitatively. And therefore, I think that we will have to live with a very sort of opaque notion, which says a consensus is reached when countries in the world decide to comply with the order that is established by the most powerful countries. But the process for these most powerful countries to be able to impose their world order on the world is a very long process. And it is very interesting that in this situation, we suddenly come to a point that was just raised in this last question, where we actually think that we should not only use military criteria in order to assess the power of a certain country, but where the most powerful countries in this world now use military to show how strong they are. Right. So is China in this situation an alternative? This was the question which was also raised. And I would say that China is the most non-ideological country when it comes to its foreign policy. Because China always sees foreign policy as something that supports its domestic agendas. And China always sees foreign policy as an instrument to actually boost its economy. Why do they need to boost the economy? Because the internal structure of the system is based on the assumption that the population will accept the system as long as the system is beneficial to the population. At this particular moment, the economic situation in China is not as positive as some newspapers seem to be telling us. And the Communist Party of China is very nervous because they see that the population does not see that the economy is developing in a direction that is not only beneficial for the state, it's not only beneficial for the business elites, but also for the population at large. And the Communist Party, you maybe don't believe this, but I've been studying this organization for 50 years, and I tell you, there is no organization around the world that I could give as an alternative example that is so conscious of its lack of legitimacy. And as it is so conscious of its lack of legitimacy, it has to invent all kinds of instruments making up for this lack of legitimacy. And one instrument for the Communist Party of China to make up for this lack of legitimacy is boosting the economy. This implies that if you cannot boost the economy, which is actually a problem that the CCP is confronted with at this moment, they know exactly that their lack of legitimacy will come to a point where their system is no longer sustainable. I was in China in 1976 when Mao Zedong died, and 4 weeks later, his entourage was actually dismissed from office. I know what the economic situation was like in China in 1976. I was too young and too unexperienced and not well trained enough to have come to the conclusion at the time that the Chinese economy was actually on the brink of collapse. But the Communist Party of China came to the conclusion that the economy was in so bad shape that the political system under the leadership of the Communist Party of China might break down. It's not our Western people saying this, it is the Communist Party of China saying it itself. And for that reason, I'm telling you this story to show that that Chinese have to be very realistic about the position of China in the world, and they will never come up with idealistic ideas about how to organize the world. And if Mr. Xi Jinping says 人类命运共同体, the community of shared, what do they say?
Shared humanity.
What?
We shared community for shared humanity.
Yes. You read this and you say, what the hell is he actually talking about? Even myself, who have been reading this text for 50 years, I say, okay, everybody can quote this. Yeah. I repeat it in Chinese because it's much easier for me to say it in Chinese than to use this very strange translation they have for this 人类命运共同体. And so interesting that everybody can quote this. UN documents actually quote this wording introduced to the UN discourse by the Chinese. But if you ask them, do you actually know what they mean? No. And I think if you try to ask Mr. Xi Jinping what he actually thinks by this, he will have an enormous problem. And the reason is that for China, they know that in terms of soft power, they learn from the US that if you have soft power, you can actually expand your impact on the world. And if you want to be a world power, you have to be a soft power. That is why they are sort of designing all these documents with all these big phrases. But I swear you, their foreign policy doesn't have anything to do with these phrases, because their foreign policy is focused on domestic issues. And that's why I don't think that China is going to be the country that is giving a new ideal to the world. No, they don't do this. They leave it to others, or they tell us that it is unnecessary. Both options are possible.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it's already it's 5 minutes. So
5 minutes to what?
5 to half past 10. Or
Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, so
you
please
have to
go ahead. Last question.
Yeah.
Thank you for presenting the triangular model to understand the power dynamics between state parties. Now, my question is, do you think that it is sufficient to just look at the state parties? Because I was alarmed that a South African national suddenly turns up as the advisor of Mr. Donald Trump, and Elon Musk, being non-elected in any way whatsoever, had an dramatic impact. And when I tried to find a similar private person having a similar impact, the only person that came to mind was Jacob Fugger, the famous banking guy in the Middle Ages in Europe. Yes, and then when we see how important the Starlink technology is for the aiming of Ukrainian artillery, and when he decided for a few months to shut down this technology, the Ukrainian army had large problems. So my question is, do you think that from a historic perspective, people like Elon Musk, are they a fluke, or is it to be expected that in the future more private people will be able to shape global politics? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this important question, because, of course, everybody wonders, right, to which degree this high-tech companies in the US are yet another source, or another sort of source on which Donald Trump relies in order to do what he wants to do, right? Because they are also, of course, providing money for his campaigns. I'm not a specialist on this question. I must say that I can only give you an informed answer on this. It's not based on my research, because I do not do research on this. But I listened to the conversation between Donald Trump and Musk. And it was very interesting, because Musk left a comparatively negative impression on me. And I was very astonished to see that Mr. Trump left a very positive impression on me. Mr. Trump, for example, was able to finish a sentence, whereas Mr. Musk was unable to finish a sentence. And Mr. Musk was obviously at that time, I mean, this was still during the campaign. President Trump had not taken over yet. And Mr. Musk was in a way sort of impressed by having this opportunity to discuss with a maybe future president of the United States, that he appeared to be totally different from all his other public appearances, and vice versa. I mean, we always know Mr. Trump as someone speaking in front of big audiences, and telling all kinds of lies and things just to have an impact on these people. But when he talked to Mr. Musk, he was very, very sharp, right? And maybe you already heard him saying several times, that he compares himself with somebody else he thinks is intelligent, yes or not. Yeah. And he makes very sure that he wants to be perceived as being more intelligent, for example, as his interlocutor. So of that reason, I think we have to understand that there is also a personal note here. And we cannot totally overlook this and just look at this from a very structural perspective and saying, here are the tech companies and here is Trump and they have a relationship and Trump has to act as they are. It's also a personal problem. It's also a personal problem that Trump always has to make clear that he is the most intelligent person in the room. And when he meets someone like Mr. Musk, he gets in a situation where he really has to challenge himself. And when he challenges himself, he can even impress on Mr. Musk, right? Very interesting. But this taken aside, I think that from the elites in the US, they are, of course, struggling in order to build up an economy in their country that can support their claim for power in the world. This is basically the problem that they have. And at this particular moment, although they are very good in certain aspects of the economic development, especially when it is linked to technology and to weapon technology and things like this, they seem to be very deficient in other places. And they realize that they have to import everything from outside because they don't have the production facilities anymore. And I think it is very interesting that, according to my understanding, at least I don't know of anybody who has already designed a future for our economies that combine the ability to produce the basic needs that the population and the country needs, in addition to, for example, high-tech products and also to financial products, to everything in the service sector. And I think it's very interesting to see that China and the US are actually struggling with the same problem, because they have to find a way to combine these two aspects. And as China is always following the model of the US, China has a problem of developing too much into the direction of the US, which includes that they are deindustrializing themselves, right? And from this point of view, I would say that Trump's affinity with high tech is, of course, a very important issue for him to be successful, at least to seem to be successful. And I'm sure that they have an impact on him. But I also see, and I think we all realize, that Mr. Musk is not Mr. Trump's best friend anymore. We also see that there are inherent conflict of interests between the high-tech companies on the one hand side and Mr. Trump's policies on the other hand side. And neither the high-tech people nor any other people I know of in the US and in China have actually invented a solution to the problem which they need to solve. And I think we know that Mr. Trump sort of tends not to sort of look very deeply into things and then find a very balanced solution. But his solution is always, he does a little bit of this, then he sees he runs into problem, then he does a little bit of that. He sees he runs into problem, he goes back to doing this, right? So, and this is also true for his foreign policy.
Well, I would like to thank you very much for your lecture, for your readiness to discuss with us very, very complex issues. And I think what I really appreciated that you broke down very complex issues, very complex matters to understandable language, which is very important, which is not every academic succeeds in doing that. So I'm very, very thankful for that. We will, or I will produce a small summary and send it to the registered participants. And also there will be, at the end of March, at the latest, there will be the recording. And it will be published on YouTube, and maybe also that's maybe if it's possible, Chinese, Russian platforms. We will see what we can do. Yeah,
never been on that.
Whoever might be
anyway.
interested. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.